Good evening. Arthur Hastings here, welcoming you once more to The Little Grey Cells. Tonight's tale: Hercule Poirot and the Woman Who Drowned in Roses, another Hercule Poirot mystery that will test the very limits of logic and reason. Before we begin, I must convey Poirot's own appreciation and mine to our extraordinary audience spanning continents and time zones. New listeners, we would be most honored if you'd subscribe and share with us your location in the comments below. Now then, settle into your chair, brew a proper tisane as the great detective would insist, and join me in unraveling this most curious affair. Your grey cells are about to be put to work. Chapter 1. The Scent of Drowning. The scent reached Poirot before the house did. It came through the open window of the taxi as the vehicle climbed the long drive through Somerset countryside, a perfume so thick and sweet it was almost visible, like walking through honey. Roses. Thousands upon thousands of them, their fragrance turning the August air heavy and strange. Hercule Poirot, who prided himself on his appreciation of order and beauty in all forms, found himself reaching for his handkerchief. It was not that the scent was unpleasant. On the contrary, it was exquisite. But there was something about its intensity, its inescapability, that made him think of words one did not usually associate with flowers. Suffocation, drowning, death made beautiful. He adjusted his collar and told himself he was being fanciful. It had been a long journey from London, and the heat of late summer had made him perhaps more susceptible to strange fancies than usual. Dr. Marcus Ashford had invited him to observe what he called a psychological curiosity. Nothing more. A woman who had devoted her life to roses. A house where beauty had become an obsession. The taxi rounded a final curve, and Thornrose House revealed itself. It was Georgian, graceful in its proportions, the warm stone glowing amber in the afternoon light. But there was something about it, Poirot thought, that suggested age beyond its years. The windows did not quite sit straight in their frames. The plaster showed fine cracks beneath recent paint. It was a house that had been loved, certainly, but loved in the way one loves something that is slowly dying, with fierce attention that cannot quite arrest decay. And the gardens. Mon Dieu, and the gardens. They spread in all directions from the house, enclosed by old brick walls that divided them into rooms. Through an archway to the left, Poirot glimpsed roses so white they hurt the eyes. To the right, blooms so dark they appeared almost black in the slanting light. And everywhere, the scent. As the taxi drew to a halt before the front entrance, Poirot observed through the window something that made him very still. Two women stood in the white garden, perhaps 30 feet apart. They were not looking at each other. One, older, dressed in pale linen, gestured toward a rose bush with the authority of ownership. The other, younger, wearing grey, turned deliberately away. Neither spoke. But the quality of that silence, the weight of all that remained unspoken between them, he caught Poirot's attention like a discordant note in a perfect symphony. He filed the observation away in that part of his mind where such things lived, waiting to declare their significance. The front door opened before he could knock. A man in his 30s, fair-haired and handsome in the way that suggested both privilege and its erosion, stood on the threshold. His smile was practiced, his handshake firm, but his eyes were slightly unfocused in the manner of one who has been drinking steadily since noon. Oliver Thorne, Poirot surmised. The stepson. Behind him appeared a woman who could only be Mrs. Vanessa Thorne herself. She was perhaps 50, beautiful with the kind of beauty that required maintenance and discipline, dressed in pale linen with a single dark red rose pinned at her shoulder. Her hair was perfect. Her smile was gracious. But when she extended her hand to welcome him, Poirot noticed that it trembled very slightly, like a leaf in wind one could not feel. He took her hand and bowed over it with his customary continental politeness. "Enchanted, madame. You are most kind to receive me at such short notice." "Not at all, Mr. Poirot. Any friend of dear Marcus is welcome at Thornrose." She released his hand and smoothed her skirt in a gesture that seemed less about wrinkles than about giving her hands something to do. "You have arrived just in time for tea. Come, you must be exhausted from your journey." Poirot was not in the least exhausted, but he recognized a hostess's formula when he heard one. He followed her into the hall, noting as he did so the fresh roses in every vase, the faint smell of damp beneath the perfume, the way Oliver Thorne watched his stepmother with an expression that might have been concern or might have been calculation. Dr. Marcus Ashford appeared from a doorway to the right, his face lighting with genuine pleasure. "Poirot, my dear fellow, you came." They embraced in the English manner, which is to say they shook hands warmly while maintaining a respectful distance. Marcus Ashford was perhaps 55, distinguished in that particularly English way that suggested tweeds and cricket and long afternoons in libraries. But there was something in his eyes as he looked at Vanessa Thorne, something Poirot could not quite name. Fondness, certainly, but beneath it, or beside it, or threaded through it, something older and less comfortable. Poirot accepted tea in a drawing-room where roses bloomed in porcelain bowls, and the light through old glass made everything shimmer as though seen through water. Mrs. Thorne poured from silver, speaking of varieties and cultivation with the authority of long devotion. Marcus listened with the attention of an old friend. Oliver drank gin rather than tea and made jokes about selling the gardens to developers that no one found amusing. And still, Poirot felt it. The wrongness, the performance. Dinner that evening confirmed his instinct. They gathered in a dining room where the table was laid with impossible perfection. Crystal caught candlelight. Silver gleamed. And at each place setting, a single perfect rose, white as bone, floating in a shallow bowl of water. Vanessa appeared in emerald silk. Her transformation from afternoon simplicity to evening elegance complete and flawless. She presided over the meal with practiced grace, but twice during the soup course she went completely still, staring at nothing until someone spoke her name, and she returned to herself with a small, apologetic smile. The young woman in grey was introduced as Iris Sutton, Vanessa's niece and companion. She ate with the care of someone who found food difficult, touching only the white elements on her plate, the fish, the cream, the cauliflower. When the conversation turned to travel, to Paris and Rome and places beyond Somerset, her dark eyes kindled with something desperate before she lowered her gaze and said nothing. The artist, Helena Cresswell, sat at the far end of the table, sketching between courses. She was perhaps 40, dressed in paint-stained trousers and a man's shirt, silver rings flashing on her fingers as she drew. She watched Vanessa with an intensity that made Poirot uncomfortable. Not hatred precisely, not love, but something between recognition and grief, as though she were memorizing a face she knew she would need to remember. And serving the meal himself, though there were other servants visible in the passage beyond, was James Fairfax, identified as the head gardener. His hands were those of a gentleman despite the dirt under his nails. His voice was educated, and when he refilled Iris Sutton's water glass, their fingers brushed, and she looked away too quickly, a flush rising to her pale cheeks. Poirot observed it all with the appearance of pleasant distraction, asking polite questions about roses, complimenting the excellent wine, agreeing with Marcus about the psychology of collectors. But his little grey cells were working, sorting, cataloguing, noting every gesture and glance and silence. These people, he thought, are all performing. Every one of them. They move through the rituals of hospitality and conversation, but they are not at ease. They are waiting for something, or hiding from something, or perhaps both. When the meal ended and the ladies withdrew, leaving the gentlemen to their port, Oliver Thorne leaned back in his chair and said with the false cheerfulness of the very drunk, "Well, Poirot, what do you make of our little paradise? Rather Gothic, is it not? Beautiful woman, beautiful house, beautiful roses, all of it just a bit too perfect to be quite real." Marcus frowned at him. "Oliver, you have had enough." "Oh, have I?" And Oliver poured himself more port with a hand that was not entirely steady. "You are quite right, old man. I have had enough. 15 years' worth of enough. But what can one do? The roses must be tended. The house must be preserved. The legend of the devoted widow must be maintained." He raised his glass in a mocking toast to no one in particular, to Vanessa Thorne, keeper of roses and secrets. Marcus's face went very still. What secrets? Oliver smiled unpleasantly. Now that would be telling. He rose unsteadily and left the room, taking the port with him. In the silence that followed, Poirot heard the roses scratching at the window like fingers asking to be let in. He heard the house settling, sounds that might have been floorboards or might have been footsteps in empty rooms. And Marcus Ashford stared at the door through which Oliver had vanished, his knuckles white where they gripped his wineglass. Poirot said gently, "You are troubled, my friend." Marcus looked at him, and for a moment something moved behind his eyes, something old and painful and unresolved. "This house," he said quietly. 30 years ago my sister died here. They said it was an accident, a tragedy at a party. Too much champagne, a stumble in the dark, a fountain in the rose garden." He paused. "I have never believed it. But I have never known what else to believe." He set down his glass and stood. "Come, Poirot. Let me show you the gardens before the light fails. There is something I want you to see." They walked out into the evening, into the scent of roses so thick it was like walking into water, and Poirot thought, "Ah, yes, now it begins. Now the mystery shows itself." And somewhere in the white garden, if one had been watching, one would have seen two women standing in silence again, not looking at each other, waiting for something that had already been set in motion and could no longer be stopped. Chapter 2. The Garden of Memory. The gardens at twilight possessed a quality that Poirot, who was not given to fanciful language, could only describe as otherworldly. Marcus led him through an archway into what he called the White Garden, and Poirot understood at once why the name was literal. Every bloom here was pale as moonlight. Iceberg roses climbed ancient walls. Alba Maxima tumbled over stone benches. Great bushes of Winchester Cathedral spread their petals like offerings. In the failing light, they seemed to glow with their own luminescence, as though they had captured the day and were releasing it slowly into the gathering dusk. It was beautiful. It was also profoundly unnatural. "No garden is only white," Poirot observed. "One does not find such purity in nature, mon ami. This has been created with great deliberation." Marcus nodded slowly. "Vanessa has spent 15 years perfecting these gardens. Each rose chosen for colour, scent, form. Nothing is accidental. Nothing is permitted that does not serve her vision of what thorn rose should be." They walked in silence for a moment. Poirot's small feet moved carefully along paths swept clean of every fallen petal. His eyes missed nothing. The precise spacing of the plantings, the way certain bushes had been trained to grow in exact symmetry, the copper labels at each root, inscribed with Latin names in a hand so perfect it might have been printed. "This is not gardening," Poirot said quietly. "This is something else. This is penance, or prayer, or perhaps both." Marcus glanced at him sharply. "You see it too, then? I see that your friend Mrs. Thorne is not merely devoted to beauty. She is attempting to impose absolute order upon something that resists order by its very nature. A living thing, it cannot be controlled completely. Yet she tries." He paused before a particularly magnificent specimen, its white blooms tinged faintly with cream at the heart. Why, one wonders? What drives this need for such perfection? That is what I hoped you might help me understand. Marcus's voice was troubled. "I have known Vanessa for many years, Poirot, since before her marriage to Edmund Thorne. She was young then, gay, full of life. But after Edmund died, something in her changed. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say something in her was revealed. This obsession with the roses, with maintaining Thorn Rose exactly as it was in his lifetime, with creating beauty so perfect it feels almost like punishment. An interesting choice of word, is it not?" Marcus stopped walking. They had reached the centre of the white garden where a fountain stood in a circular clearing. It was Georgian, like the house, carved from pale stone, a simple design of a basin supported by 3 dolphins. Water fell from their mouths in thin streams, creating a sound like gentle rain. But the fountain was filled not with coins or lily pads, but with roses. White roses floated on the surface, dozens of them, their petals slowly unfurling as they absorbed water, and sank. Poirot stood very still. "It was here," Marcus said, 30 years ago this September. My sister Catherine was found at dawn, floating in this fountain. Drowned. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. They said she had been drinking at a party, that she wandered into the garden alone, that she slipped and struck her head on the stone, and fell unconscious into the water. An accident, a tragic accident. You do not believe this. I do not know what to believe. Marcus stared at the floating roses. Catherine was not a careless woman. She did not drink to excess. And there were things about that night that were never adequately explained. His voice dropped lower. She had written to me the week before. She said she needed to speak with me urgently, that she had made a terrible mistake and did not know how to make it right. So she asked me to come to Thornrose for the party. But I was travelling, lecturing in Edinburgh. The letter did not reach me until after she was dead. Poirot said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was often the most useful tool in the detective's arsenal. People filled silence with truth. There was a girl, Marcus continued, Rose Cunningham. She and Catherine had been friends since childhood, inseparable. She was here the night Catherine died. But after the funeral, she disappeared. No one has seen her since. Some said she was so devastated by grief that she could not bear to remain. Others said, he hesitated, that she had been in love with Edmund Thorne, that Catherine's engagement to him had broken her heart, that she fled to escape the pain of seeing them together. And you, what did you believe? I believed that Rose knew something about Catherine's death that she could not bear to speak, that she ran from knowledge rather than grief. Marcus turned to face Poirot directly. I have spent 30 years building a career on understanding the human mind, and I cannot understand what happened to my own sister. It haunts me, Poirot. It has always haunted me. And so you invite me here to observe. I invite you here because you see what others miss, because you understand that human behavior is a language that can be read if one knows how. He gestured toward the house where lights were beginning to appear in windows. These people, Vanessa and Oliver and Iris and the others, they are all connected to this place, to this history. They move through their days with such careful courtesy, but underneath I do not know what I sense. Fear, Poirot suggested. Guilt. Secrets that have been kept so long they have become part of the foundation of this house. Yes. Marcus looked at him with something like relief. Yes, exactly that. They began walking again, leaving the memorial fountain with its floating roses behind. Poirot's mind was working rapidly, sorting facts, cataloguing impressions, building patterns from fragments. "Tell me," he said casually, "does Mrs. Thorne maintain this fountain always with fresh roses? Every day? She comes here at dawn and replaces them herself. The servants are not permitted to touch it. Every day for 15 years. Yes, and before her husband died. Did she do this then also?" Marcus frowned, trying to remember. No, the fountain was not used at all after Catherine's death. It was Edmund who had it drained and covered. He could not bear to look at it. It was only after he died that Vanessa had it restored and began this ritual. How very interesting. Is it? Marcus sounded doubtful. It seems to me merely sad. Perhaps it is both. Poirot adjusted his tie, which the humidity had caused to sit slightly askew, an offence to his sense of order. "Tell me one thing more, mon ami. This Rose Cunningham who disappeared. You said she and your sister were childhood friends. Did they resemble each other?" Resemble? Marcus considered the question. In colouring, no. Catherine was dark, Rose was fair. But in some other way, yes, I suppose they did. They moved the same way, gestured the same way, finished each other's sentences. People used to say they were like two halves of the same person. Why do you ask? No particular reason. Merely the little grey cells, though they collect all information without judgment. Later, perhaps, the significance reveals itself. They had reached the edge of the gardens now where cultivated beauty gave way to wilderness. Beyond the final wall, Poirot could see roses growing wild, untamed, creating arbours and tunnels and impenetrable thickets. The wild garden, Marcus explained. Edmund's father planted it. The idea was to let nature determine the form rather than imposing human design. Vanessa leaves it alone. She says some things should be allowed to grow as they wish. The irony appears to be lost on her. Indeed. A figure emerged from the shadows near the wall. It was James Fairfax, the gardener, carrying a basket of cut blooms. He started slightly at seeing them, then offered a respectful nod. "Good evening, Dr. Ashford. Mr. Poirot." His voice was cultured, at odds with his rough clothing. "I was just collecting the evening roses for Mrs. Thorne. She likes them cut after sunset. She says the scent is stronger then." "You are devoted to your work, Mr. Fairfax," Poirot observed. The man's expression was unreadable in the dim light. "I am devoted to the garden, sir. It is the only thing here that does not lie." He moved past them toward the house, leaving a wake of fragrance so intense it made Poirot's eyes water. Marcus watched him go with a puzzled expression. Curious fellow. Vanessa says he appeared 5 years ago looking for work, that he had recommendations from some of the finest estates in England. But he never speaks of his past, and he works like a man trying to forget something, or to atone for something. You see guilt everywhere tonight, Poirot. I see what is there. The question is always the same, mon ami. Is it the guilt of action or the guilt of knowledge? They walked towards the house, its windows golden with lamplight, its beautiful facade hiding God knew what secrets. Often they are not the same thing at all. Dinner had been cleared away by the time they returned. They found Vanessa in the drawing room, Oliver sprawled in a chair with a fresh glass of whiskey, Iris working at needlepoint with fierce concentration, and Helena Cresswell sketching with quick, decisive strokes. Vanessa looked up as they entered, and Poirot saw again that flicker of something in her eyes, that moment of absence before she returned to herself, and smiled. "Gentlemen, you have been admiring the gardens, I trust. They are magnificent, madame." Poirot bowed slightly, though I confess the memorial fountain, it is most touching. To maintain such devotion to the memory of one who died so long ago. The room went very quiet. Vanessa's hands, which had been pouring tea, became absolutely still. When she looked at Poirot, her eyes were darker than before, as though some light behind them had been extinguished. "You are kind to say so, Mr. Poirot. Catherine Ashford was," she paused, "very dear to us all. Her death was a great tragedy." Helena Cresswell's pencil stopped moving. Iris's needle remained suspended in mid-air. Oliver's glass paused halfway to his lips. It was Marcus who broke the silence. "I was just telling Poirot about that dreadful night. He is kind enough to listen to an old friend's morbid memories." Vanessa set down the teapot with great care. "Perhaps it is better not to speak of such things, Marcus. The past is past. We cannot change it. We can only tend to what remains." She rose abruptly, murmuring something about checking on the kitchen, and left the room. In the silence that followed, Helena Cresswell looked up from her sketchpad and met Poirot's eyes. Her expression was complex, knowing, as though she saw exactly what he was doing and approved. Then she returned to her drawing without a word. Poirot smoothed his moustache and thought, "Yes, there is something here, something buried deep and growing deeper, like roots spreading through dark earth, waiting for the moment when they will break through to the light and reveal what has been hidden all along." The game, as they say, was afoot. Chapter 3. Patterns in the Morning Light. Poirot had learned over many years that a household reveals its true nature at breakfast. Dinner was performance. A luncheon was social obligation. But breakfast was the hour when discipline faltered and authentic selves emerged. People were tired, unguarded, their masks not yet properly fastened for the day ahead. It was the hour when truth showed itself, in small gestures and careless words. He descended at 7:30, earlier than was strictly polite for a guest, and found the breakfast room empty save for a single place setting. The sideboard held covered dishes, still warm. Through the window he could see the gardens, their colours muted in the early light, and beyond them, a figure moving among the white roses. Vanessa Thorne, dressed in gardening clothes, knelt before the memorial fountain. As Poirot watched, she lifted roses from the water, one by one, their petals heavy and translucent with moisture, and placed them in a basket at her side. Then she drew fresh blooms from a second basket and set them afloat, arranging each with infinite care until the fountain became once more a floating garden. The ritual took perhaps 10 minutes. When it was complete, she remained kneeling there, her head bowed, her hands clasped in her lap. Not praying, Poirot thought, or perhaps praying to something that had nothing to do with God. Sir? Poirot turned to find James Fairfax standing in the doorway, that same basket of cut roses in his hands. In the morning light, the gardener's face was drawn, exhausted, as though he had not slept. "Good morning, Mr. Fairfax. You are about your duties early. The roses wait for no man, sir. They must be cut, watered, dead-headed, trained. A garden is not a painting that remains as you leave it. It is always growing, always changing, and always trying to become something other than what you wish it to be. You speak as one who understands struggle." Fairfax met his eyes, and in that moment Poirot saw intelligence, education, and something that might have been desperation. "I understand duty, Mr. Poirot, and the difference between what one wishes and what one must do." He moved past to arrange the roses in vases throughout the room, his movements practiced but not servile. There was about him the quality of a man playing a role for which he was overqualified. Poirot helped himself to eggs and toast, contemplating this interesting specimen. A gentleman-turned-gardener, yet possessing none of the resentment such a fall typically produced. Instead, there was something almost like relief in his manner, as though manual labour offered escape from something worse. The door opened again. Iris Sutton entered, pale as milk in the morning light, and stopped short at seeing Poirot. "Oh, I did not realise anyone else would be down so early." Poirot rose and bowed. "Mademoiselle, please do not let my presence disturb you. I am, as they say, the early bird." She approached the sideboard but took only tea, no food. Her hands, Poirot noticed, were trembling slightly as she poured. When she sat, she chose the chair farthest from his, angled towards the window, toward the gardens where James Fairfax had disappeared to continue his work. "A beautiful morning," Poirot observed pleasantly. "You are perhaps fond of walking in the gardens at this hour." Colour rose to her cheeks. "Sometimes, when I'm unable to sleep. The insomnia, it troubles you often enough." She drank her tea in small sips, her eyes returning again and again to the window. Poirot pretended to read the newspaper that had been left folded on the table, but over its edge he watched her with the attention he gave to all things that did not wish to be seen. There was about her an air of waiting, of listening for something, and when, after several minutes, a faint whistle came from the direction of the wild garden, she set down her cup with a hand that shook and rose abruptly. "Forgive me, Mr. Poirot. I have just remembered something I must attend to." She fled. There was no other word for it. Poirot waited 30 seconds, then rose and moved to the window. From this angle he could just see the path that led to the wild garden. And yes, there was Iris hurrying along it, her grey skirts catching on rose thorns, she did not pause to disentangle. And there, emerging from the shadows, was James Fairfax, reaching for her with hands that knew the shape of her waist, drawing her into an embrace that spoke of long practice and desperate tenderness. They disappeared together into the green shadows. Eh bien, Poirot murmured to himself. So that is how matters stand. He returned to his breakfast with the satisfaction of a man who has just placed an important piece in a complex puzzle. The ill young woman and the mysterious gardener conducting a clandestine affair under the nose of an entire household. One wondered if they were observed only by Hercule Poirot, or if others had noted their secret and chosen to remain silent. Oliver Thorne arrived next, looking as though he had slept in his evening clothes. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands unsteady as he poured coffee. He ignored the food entirely and stood by the window drinking black coffee and staring at nothing. "Rough night, old fellow," he said without looking at Poirot. "You could not sleep." Sleep. Oliver laughed without humour. "I do not sleep much in this house, Mr. Poirot. Too many ghosts, too many roses, too many years of watching and waiting for something that never comes. You refer to your inheritance, perhaps?" Oliver's head snapped around. His face was ugly with sudden anger, then smoothed itself into something approximating civility. "Marcus has been talking, I see." "Yes, Mr. Poirot, I refer to my inheritance, my father's estate, held in trust until my stepmother's death. 15 years I have waited. 15 years watching her pour money into roses while the house crumbles and the farms lose value, and I accumulate debts that would make your head spin. It is difficult, certainly. Difficult." Oliver drained his coffee and poured more. "You have no idea. But of course one must not complain. One must be patient. One must trust that everything will work out in the end." He stared into his cup. The end. Sometimes I think the end will never come. That I will grow old in this house, waiting, watching those damn roses bloom and die and bloom again, season after season, until I am as dead as my father, and still she will be here, still tending her garden, still maintaining her perfect widow's devotion. His voice had risen. He caught himself, modulated it back to something like normalcy. "Forgive me. I should not burden a guest with family troubles. It is the drink talking. I have drunk too much and slept too little." He left the room abruptly, taking the coffee pot with him. Poirot sat alone again, considering. Oliver Thorne was desperate, angry and impotent. A dangerous combination. One wondered what such a man might do if pushed far enough. The door opened once more. This time it was Helena Cresswell, dressed in men's trousers and a paint-stained shirt, her hair tied back with a ribbon, looking more like a student than a woman of 43. She carried her ever-present sketch-pad, Mr. Poirot. She helped herself to toast and jam with the efficient movements of someone who considered eating a necessary interruption to more important work. "I see you are cataloguing our little household. Are we all suspects in some crime yet to be committed? Or is this merely professional habit?" Poirot smiled. "You are very direct, mademoiselle. I have learned that directness saves time." She sat across from him and bit into her toast. "You are wondering who I am and why I am here. Everyone does. The answer is simple. I paint roses. Mrs. Thorne has the finest rose gardens in England. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement. Yet I observe that you watch Mrs. Thorne herself with almost as much attention as you watch the roses. Helena's eyes, which were grey and remarkably penetrating, studied him with new interest. "You notice things, Mr. Poirot?" "Yes. I watch Vanessa. She is, you might say, the most interesting subject here. A woman who has devoted 15 years to creating perfection from grief. One wonders what lies beneath such devotion. You believe something does lie beneath?" "I believe everyone has secrets, Mr. Poirot. Some are simply better at hiding them than others." She opened her sketchpad and showed him a drawing. It was Vanessa Thorne, rendered in quick but expert strokes, kneeling before the memorial fountain. But there was something in the portrayal that went beyond mere likeness. The angle suggested not devotion, but submission, not remembrance, but penance. "You are a very observant artist," Poirot said carefully. "I paint what I see." She closed the sketchpad. "And what I see here is a house built on silence, Mr. Poirot. Beautiful silence, scented with roses, but silence nonetheless. The question is, what would happen if someone were to break it? You are perhaps thinking of doing so yourself." Helena smiled. "I am thinking many things. But thinking is not doing, and is it? We shall see what transpires." She left with her toast still half eaten, moving with purpose towards the gardens. Poirot sat in the now empty breakfast room, his eggs grown cold, his mind working rapidly. So many secrets in this house. Oliver's desperation and his forgeries. Iris's doomed love and her illness. James Fairfax's mysterious past. Helena's watchful knowledge. And beneath it all, Vanessa Thorne with her roses and her rituals and her 30-year penance for something unnamed. Dr. Marcus Ashford appeared in the doorway, looking refreshed by sleep and cheerful in the morning light. "Poirot, my dear fellow, I trust you slept well. Shall we take a walk before the heat becomes oppressive? I want to show you the distillery where they make rose oil. Quite fascinating, the process." Poirot rose, adjusting his jacket with precision. "But of course, though I suspect, mon ami, that the processes occurring in this house are far more fascinating than any distillation of flowers." Marcus looked puzzled. "Whatever do you mean?" Poirot merely smiled and followed his friend into the gardens, into the amber light and the suffocating scent of roses, into the heart of a mystery that grew more complex with each observation. The pieces were beginning to arrange themselves, not yet into a picture, but into the promise of one, and Hercule Poirot, as always, would wait with patience until the pattern revealed itself completely. Chapter 4. The Drowning. The distillery stood at the far edge of the cultivated gardens, a stone outbuilding older than the house itself. Marcus pushed open the heavy door and stood aside for Poirot to enter. The scent hit like a physical blow. It was rose perfume concentrated to an almost unbearable intensity, thick and sweet and cloying, the air itself made viscous by it. Poirot, who prided himself on his controlled reactions to all circumstances, found himself gasping slightly, as though the atmosphere had become too dense to breathe. Marcus, accustomed perhaps to the onslaught, moved forward into the dimness. Along one wall stood 3 enormous copper vats, each large enough to hold a man, or a woman. Ancient brick furnaces beneath them lay cold now, but the vats still held water and roses, steeping in the traditional manner. "Vanessa conducts the distillation process herself," Marcus explained, his voice echoing strangely in the stone space. "She learned it from Edmund's father, who learned it from his father. The method has not changed in 100 years. Rose petals steeped in water for days, the essence drawn off, concentrated, bottled. They sell a small amount each year. The rest she keeps. For what purpose? Marcus shrugged. Sentiment, I suppose. Or perhaps it is like everything else here, part of the ritual of remembrance. Poirot moved closer to the nearest vat. The water was cloudy with rose essence, and floating on its surface were hundreds of petals, crimson and white, mixed together, slowly disintegrating. The light that came through the high windows was warped by old glass, making everything shimmer as though seen under water. It would not be difficult, Poirot observed quietly, to drown in such a place. Marcus stared at him. What a morbid thought. Is it? Poirot examined the vat more closely. The sides were smooth copper, either rim perhaps 4 feet from the ground. One would need to climb or be lifted to enter such a vessel. And once inside with the water and the petals and that terrible scent, it would be, I think, a most unpleasant death. Poirot, really? Forgive me, mon ami. The little grey cells, they wander where they wish. He turned away from the vats, but the image remained. Let us return to the house. I find I do not care for this place. They emerged into sunshine and cleaner air, and Poirot breathed deeply, grateful for the mere smell of living roses, rather than their distilled essence. The day passed in the manner of house parties everywhere. Luncheon was served on the terrace. Helena sketched. Oliver disappeared to his study with a bottle. Iris rested, pleading a headache. Marcus and Poirot played chess in the library, a game that Poirot won through careful attention while his mind worked on other puzzles entirely. Tea was served at 4. Vanessa presided with her usual grace, but Poirot noticed that she touched nothing herself, merely poured for others, with hands that trembled more than they had the previous day. At 6 o'clock she excused herself to dress for dinner. At 7, when the household gathered in the drawing room for sherry, she had not appeared. Oliver, already well into his evening's drinking, made a joke about feminine vanity requiring extra time. Marcus frowned and checked his watch. Helena continued sketching, but her pencil moved more slowly, her attention elsewhere. Iris sat frozen, her needlework forgotten in her lap. At 7:15, Marcus rose. This is unlike her. She is never late. Perhaps she's unwell, Iris suggested, her voice barely audible. I shall go and inquire. Marcus left the room. He returned 5 minutes later, his face troubled. She is not in her room. Her maid has not seen her since 4 o'clock. She went to cut roses for the evening vases and did not return. Poirot was already on his feet. Where would she go to cut roses at such an hour? The gardener would know. Oliver, bestir yourself. Find Fairfax. But it was Iris who spoke, her face white as chalk. The distillery. She cuts the blooms from the blood garden for the distillery. She was making a new batch. She said this morning it must be prepared today. They went quickly, all of them, through the gardens now shadowed by early evening, the amber light fading to something darker and less kind. The scent of roses was overwhelming, and beneath it, Poirot detected something else, something that made his small feet move faster. The distillery door stood open. That was the first wrong thing. Vanessa always closed it, Iris whispered. Always. She said the scent must be contained. Marcus entered first, with Poirot close behind. The light was dimmer now, the copper vats gleaming dully in the shadows. One of them was overflowing. Water and rose petals spilled over the rim, spreading across the stone floor in a tide of red and white. And in the vat itself, floating face down among the roses, was Vanessa Thorne. Her emerald dress spread around her like another petal. Her perfect hair had come loose and drifted in the cloudy water. One hand trailed over the side of the vat, fingers curled as though reaching for something just beyond grasp. She was quite obviously dead. Marcus made a sound that was not quite a word. Helena, entering behind them, stopped as though she had struck a wall. Oliver pushed past them all and would have lunged toward the vat, but Poirot caught his arm with surprising strength for so small a man. "Do not touch anything. This is now a scene of crime." Crime. Oliver's voice was wild. It was an accident. She slipped. She fell. She drowned like Catherine, Marcus finished, his voice hollow. Like my sister, in roses and water. Drowned. He swayed where he stood. Poirot guided him to a wooden bench against the wall, then turned his attention to the vat. He did not approach it directly. Instead, he moved around the room with small, precise steps, his eyes missing nothing. The floor near the vat was wet, but there were no footprints save those they themselves had just made. The door showed no signs of forced entry. A basket of freshly cut roses sat near the entrance, filled with blooms from the blood garden, their crimson petals so dark they appeared black. Beside the basket lay a pair of gardening shears. Poirot bent to examine them without touching. There was no blood on the blades, no sign of struggle. They lay as though dropped casually, as though someone had simply set them aside to attend to other work. He approached the vat at last, standing on a wooden stool to look down into the terrible mixture of woman and roses and water. Vanessa's face was turned away from him, hidden by her floating hair. Her hands, he noted, bore no defensive wounds. Her clothing was not torn. There was a bruise, perhaps, on the back of her head, visible where her hair had parted. But in the dim light he could not be certain. "Monsieur Fairfax," he called. The gardener stood in the doorway, his face stricken. "You must ride for the police. At once. Tell them there has been a death. Tell them that Hercule Poirot requests they bring a competent medical man and a photographer. Go quickly." Fairfax hesitated, his eyes finding Iris where she stood, supported by Helena. Then he turned and ran. The others remained frozen in a tableau of horror. Oliver had collapsed onto another bench, his head in his hands. Marcus stared at nothing, his face grey as ash. Helena's arms were around Iris, who shook violently but made no sound. Poirot studied each of them in turn, his mind racing through possibilities, cataloguing observations, building hypotheses. A woman drowns in roses, as another woman drowned 30 years before. The same house, the same method, the same terrible poetry of death made beautiful. Coincidence? The little grey cells rejected the notion absolutely. But if not coincidence, then what? Revenge? Justice delayed? Or something else entirely, something more complex and more tragic than simple murder? The light continued to fade. The copper vats gleamed like dull mirrors, and in the largest of them, Vanessa Thorne floated among her beloved roses. Her devotion finally ended. Her 15 years of penance concluded in a manner she could never have imagined. Or could she? The question formed in Poirot's mind and lodged there, insistent and troubling. Had Vanessa Thorne expected this? Had she known in some part of herself that her accounting would come due? Had she perhaps even welcomed it? He looked down at her still form and thought of the trembling hands, the moments of absence, the daily ritual at the memorial fountain. A woman paying penance. A woman haunted by the past. A woman who had perhaps been waiting 30 years for justice to arrive. And now it had, in the form of rosewater and drowning, in the terrible symmetry of history repeating itself in the very house where it began. Poirot stepped down from the stool and moved to the open door. Night was falling quickly now. Soon the police would arrive with their questions and their procedures, and the investigation would begin in earnest. But Hercule Poirot had already begun. From the moment he had seen Vanessa kneeling at the fountain that morning, he had been observing, noting, assembling the pieces of a puzzle he had not yet known existed. Now the puzzle had a centre, a terrible and undeniable fact around which all else must arrange itself. Vanessa Thorne was dead, and somewhere in this house of roses and secrets, someone knew exactly why. Chapter 5. The official inquiry inspector Gerald Marsh arrived from Taunton with admirable speed, bringing with him a police surgeon, a photographer, and an air of competent skepticism. He was a tall man in his 50s, lean and weathered, with the accent of Somerset and the eyes of someone who had seen enough death to be unmoved by its theatrics. He surveyed the scene in the distillery with professional detachment, then turned to Poirot with a raised eyebrow. "You are the Belgian detective. I have heard of you. Hercule Poirot, at your service, Inspector. I am a guest in this house, nothing more. But I have taken the liberty of preserving the scene as I found it. Thoughtful of you." Marsh's tones suggested this might not be entirely welcome, though I understand you did not actually discover the body. No. That unfortunate privilege belonged to Dr. Marcus Ashford and myself together, with the others following closely behind. How many others? 5. The stepson, Oliver Thorne, the niece, Miss Iris Sutton, the artist, Miss Helena Cresswell, and the gardener, James Fairfax. Also, Mrs. Thorne's lady's maid and the cook were in the house, though they did not come to the distillery. Quite a houseful. Marsh gestured to the police surgeon. "Dr. Webb, if you please." The examination was conducted with efficiency. Vanessa Thorne was lifted from the vat with difficulty, water and rose petals streaming from her clothing. Laid upon the stone floor, where she looked smaller than she had in life, diminished by death in that way that always unsettled Poirot. Her face was pale and serene, as though she had simply fallen asleep in an unusual place. Dr. Webb worked in silence for several minutes, then rose and brushed off his knees. Drowned, certainly. Water in the lungs, froth about the mouth and nose. There is a contusion at the base of the skull, here. He indicated the spot. Consistent with striking the side of the vat as she fell, or possibly with being struck before entering the water. I cannot say with certainty without further examination. Time of death. Between 5 and 7 o'clock this evening, judging by temperature and rigour. The water complicates the estimate. Marsh nodded slowly. So we have a woman who came to this place alone, sometime in the early evening, and either fell into the vat accidentally, striking her head, or was struck and placed there deliberately. There is a third possibility, Poirot interjected quietly, which is that she climbed into the vat of her own volition. Both men stared at him. Suicide. Marsh frowned. In a vat of rosewater. That strikes you as likely, does it? I say only that it is possible. Poirot gestured delicately toward the ladder that leaned against the wall. One observes that to enter the vat requires deliberate effort. It is not a place into which one falls by accident. The rim is too high. The floor around it was not wet before we arrived. There are no signs of struggle. Either she climbed or she was lifted. For a woman alone to be lifted into such a vessel without resistance suggests unconsciousness. For her to climb suggests either suicide or some other purpose we do not yet comprehend. Or she was meeting someone here, Marsh said, and that someone struck her and placed her in the vat. That also is possible. The photographer's flash powder flared white in the darkness, capturing the scene in stark detail. Marsh waited until the work was complete, then ordered the body removed to await the coroner. "Now then," he said, turning to Poirot, "let us hear what these guests of yours have to say." They assembled in the library at Marsh's request, each pale and shaken, none quite meeting anyone else's eyes. The inspector positioned himself behind the desk with his notebook, while Poirot took a chair in the corner where he could observe without intruding. Marsh questioned them each in turn, and Poirot listened with the attention he gave to music, hearing not just the words but the rhythm beneath them, the hesitations and emphasis that revealed more than any statement. Oliver Thorne claimed he had been in his study from 4 o'clock onward, working on estate accounts. No, he had seen no one. Yes, he had been drinking, but he was perfectly capable of remembering his movements. His stepmother's death was a terrible shock, a tragedy, but he could not pretend they had been close. 15 years of tension, Inspector. I will not lie about it. But I did not kill her. His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed him, trembling as he lit cigarette after cigarette. Iris Sutton, questioned next, spoke so softly that Marsh had to ask her twice to repeat herself. She had been resting in her room with a headache from 4 o'clock until summoned for sherry. No, she had not heard or seen anything unusual. Yes, her aunt had seemed distressed lately, but then Vanessa was always somewhat distant, preoccupied with her gardens. She wept as she spoke, delicate tears that left her face even paler than before. Helena Cresswell was more composed. She had been in the conservatory painting until 6 o'clock, when the light failed. She'd seen no one, heard nothing. Mrs. Thorne had been a gracious hostess and a fascinating subject. Her death was a loss to art, if nothing else. Her tone was neutral, but Poirot noticed that her hands, usually so steady with pencil and brush, were clenched in her lap. James Fairfax admitted to being in the gardens until nearly 7, preparing beds for autumn planting. Nay, he had been near the wild garden, which was some distance from the distillery. He had not seen Mrs. Thorne after luncheon. When pressed about his relationship with the household, he became defensive. He was an employee inspector, nothing more. He did his work, kept to himself, and knew nothing of family matters. But his eyes, Poirot noted, kept returning to Iris with an expression that gave the lie to his claimed detachment. Dr. Marcus Ashford was questioned last. He had spent the afternoon in his room, reading and making notes for his monograph. He had come down for sherry at 7 and found the others already concerned about Vanessa's absence. He spoke calmly, professionally, but his face was grey and his hands shook when he removed his spectacles to clean them. Marsh closed his notebook with a snap, so no one saw or heard anything. No one admits to being near the distillery. The deceased went there alone to prepare roses for distillation and somehow ended up drowned in a vat. He looked around the assembled faces. Does that strike any of you as credible? Silence. Mrs. Thorne was meticulous in her habits, Iris ventured. She would have been careful. Careful people do not accidentally drown themselves in vats, Marsh observed dryly. Perhaps it was not an accident, Helena said. Her voice was quiet but clear. Perhaps it was meant to be this way. All eyes turned to her. What do you mean by that? Marsh demanded. Helena met his gaze steadily. I mean that Vanessa Thorne has spent 15 years in devoted service to this house and its roses. Every day the same rituals, the same routines, the same remembrance of the dead. One wonders if such devotion might not become unbearable. If a woman so committed to perfection might not, in the end, choose to end things on her own terms. That is a monstrous suggestion, Oliver burst out. Is it, or is it simply honest? Helena's voice remained level. We all felt it, did we not? The weight of this place, the suffocation of all that beauty and order. Perhaps she felt it most of all. Marsh held up a hand. Speculation helps no one. What I need are facts, movements, times, observations. He stood. I will be conducting a thorough investigation. No one is to leave Thornrose until I give permission. Is that understood? Murmurs of assent. As the household dispersed, subdued and shaken, Marsh turned to Poirot. Well, Mr. Poirot, you have sat very quietly through all of this. Have you any observations to share? Poirot rose and straightened his jacket with precision. I observe, Inspector, that everyone in this house is lying. About what? That I do not yet know. But each of them has said something that is not quite true, or omitted something that should have been said. The gardener is not what he claims. The niece is far more ill than she admits. The stepson is desperate beyond mere financial embarrassment. The artist knows something she has not revealed. And Dr. Ashford, he paused. Dr. Ashford is haunted by more than this death alone. Marsh studied him. You know something. I know that 30 years ago, a woman named Catherine Ashford drowned in this very estate in the memorial fountain. She was Dr. Ashford's sister. She was engaged to Edmund Thorne, Vanessa's late husband. And on the night she died, another young woman named Rose Cunningham disappeared and was never seen again. The inspector's expression sharpened. You think there is a connection. I think, Poirot said carefully, that the past in this house is not past. It is present, breathing, alive, and it has killed again. He moved to the window and looked out at the darkened gardens, at the shapes of roses barely visible in the moonlight. There is a pattern here, Inspector. A terrible symmetry. 2 women drowned in water and roses, 30 years apart. One would have to be very foolish indeed to believe this is coincidence, or very innocent. Poirot turned back and smiled without humour. In my experience, Inspector, true innocence is the rarest quality of all, especially in houses where roses grow so thick they drown out everything else. The 2 men stood in silence and contemplating murder and memory, justice and secrets, the weight of years pressing down upon this house and all who dwelt within it. Outside, the roses released their nighttime scent, sweet and cloying and inescapable. Inside, somewhere, a killer waited, and Hercule Poirot prepared to uncover them. Chapter 6. Photographs and Lies. Poirot rose before dawn, as was his custom when the little grey cells required solitude for their work. He dressed with his usual meticulous care, though there was no one to observe him, and descended to find the house silent and watchful, as though the very walls were holding their breath. Through the windows the gardens were still dark, roses invisible but present, their scent a ghost of the daytime intensity. He made himself coffee in the kitchen, a liberty he would not normally take as a guest. But murder altered the rules of hospitality. As he waited for the water to boil, he arranged in his mind the facts as he knew them, setting them out like pieces on a chessboard. Fact 1. Vanessa Thorne drowned in a vat of rosewater between 5 and 7 o'clock yesterday evening. Fact 2. 30 years ago, Catherine Ashford drowned in the memorial fountain on this same estate. Fact 3. On the night of Catherine's death, Rose Cunningham disappeared. Fact 4. Vanessa Thorne had maintained a daily ritual at Catherine's memorial fountain for 15 years. Fact 5. Everyone in this house had motive, opportunity, and secrets they were concealing. He poured his coffee and added precisely 2 lumps of sugar, stirring in a clockwise direction exactly 3 times. Order in all things. Order imposed upon chaos. But what chaos was he attempting to order? A murder that resembled an accident that echoed another death from decades past. A woman who spent 15 years building gardens as though building a shrine. A household of people bound together not by affection, but by something darker and more complex. The sun began to rise, turning the eastern windows gold. Poirot carried his coffee to the library and settled into a chair to wait. Helena Cresswell appeared at 7, looking as though she too had not slept. She started at seeing him, then entered and closed the door behind her with deliberate care. "You are up early, Mr. Poirot. As are you, mademoiselle." He gestured to the chair opposite. "Will you sit? I find I have questions and you, I think, have answers." She sat, folding her hands in her lap with a composure that was entirely artificial. "What makes you think that?" "Because you watch," Poirot said simply. "You observe. You're an artist, yes, but you're also something else. You're a woman on a mission. And now that mission has become complicated by death." Helena's grey eyes studied him for a long moment. Then, with what appeared to be relief, she reached into the pocket of her jacket and withdrew a leather portfolio. "I was going to burn these," she said. "After Vanessa died, I thought there was no point any longer, but perhaps you should see them first." She opened the portfolio and spread photographs on the table between them. Old photographs, sepia-toned, the paper soft with age, young women in the fashions of 30 years ago, garden parties, laughter caught in eternal stillness. Then Poirot examined each one with care. 2 women appeared in nearly every photograph, sometimes together, sometimes separate, but always present. One was dark-haired and vivid, her beauty dramatic. The other was fair and softer, her loveliness more subtle. "Catherine and Rose," Helena said quietly. "Catherine Ashford and Rose Cunningham. Best friends since childhood. Inseparable." She pointed to the dark-haired woman. "My mother, and her companion who disappeared the night my mother died." "Your mother." "I am Catherine's daughter, Mr. Poirot. Born of an affair she had when she was 18, before her engagement. I was given up for adoption. I never knew her. But I have spent years learning about her, finding photographs, letters, piecing together her life." She touched one photograph gently. "She loved roses. She loved life. She wanted desperately to keep me, but could not. And she drowned in a fountain at Thorne Rose House when I was 5 years old." Poirot's attention sharpened. "You believe her death was not accidental?" "I know it was not." Helena pulled out a letter, the paper yellowed and fragile. This was written by Catherine to Rose Cunningham 3 days before the party. "Listen," she read in a voice carefully controlled. "Dearest Rose, I cannot marry him. I love another, and always have. Edmund is kind, but I would make him miserable. I must tell him the truth before the wedding. Pray for me. Pray that he will understand and release me without scandal." She set the letter down. Catherine intended to break her engagement to Edmund Thorne. She was going to marry someone else, someone she truly loved. But she died before she could do it. And Rose Cunningham, her best friend, disappeared the same night. And you think this Rose murdered your mother? I have thought so for 6 years. Helena's voice was flat. I have lived in this house, painted these roses, watched Vanessa Thorne with her rituals and her perfect gardens, and I have thought, here is the woman who built her life on my mother's grave. Here is the one who got away with murder. But now, Poirot said gently, you're not so certain. Helena looked away. Now she is dead in the same manner. Now I wonder if I've been wrong about everything. Show me another photograph. Poirot pointed to one she had not yet explained. This one. The 2 women standing together in a garden. Helena handed it to him. That was taken a month before Catherine died. Poirot held it close, examining every detail. The 2 women were indeed remarkably similar in posture, in gesture, in the tilt of their heads. Sisters might look thus. Or, he thought with sudden clarity, the same woman might look thus if photographed twice with different arrangements of hair and clothing. He set down the photograph and looked at Helena with new understanding. Mademoiselle, I must ask you a question of great delicacy. This Rose Cunningham who disappeared. Have you ever seen another photograph of her? One taken after Catherine's death? No, there are none. She vanished completely. And Vanessa Thorne. When did she arrive at Thorne, Rose? 2 months after Catherine died. She was a widow, I believe, or said she was. Edmund married her within the year. A whirlwind courtship. She brought nothing with her but a small inheritance and a devotion to roses. Poirot rose and paced to the window. The morning light revealed the white garden in all its artificial perfection. And you have lived here 6 years, watching her, suspecting her, and never once considered that she might be not Rose the murderer, but Rose the penitent. Helena went very still. What are you saying? I am saying that the woman who drowned yesterday was not born Vanessa Thorne. She was born Rose Cunningham, and she has spent 30 years atoning for a death that haunts her still. The words hung in the air between them. That is impossible, Helena whispered, but her face said she was already believing it. Is it? Consider. 2 women, very close, very similar. One dies, the other disappears. A new woman arrives, marries the bereaved fiancé, devotes herself to roses and to maintaining a memorial for the dead woman. Every day for 15 years the same ritual. Not hatred, mademoiselle, grief, not triumph, but penance. But if Vanessa was Rose, if she did not murder my mother, then who did? That, Poirot said quietly, is the question upon which everything depends. The door opened. Inspector Marsh entered, looking irritable and official. Mr. Poirot, I need your assistance. We have found something in Mrs. Thorne's room. Papers. Financial documents. He glanced at Helena. Perhaps this conversation should continue later. Of course. Helena gathered her photographs with shaking hands. Mr. Poirot, I must know the truth. Whatever it is. I have lived too long with lies. We shall find it, Poirot assured her. The truth, it has a way of revealing itself when all the lies are stripped away. She left, and Marsh led Poirot upstairs to Vanessa's bedroom. It was a study in restraint, pale colours and simple furniture, nothing excessive or ornate. But the wardrobe stood open, and from a hidden drawer at the bottom, Marsh had removed a wooden box. Inside were documents, marriage certificates, birth records, bank statements. And underneath them all, a diary bound in cracked leather. "The marriage certificate shows she was married before," Marsh said, "to someone named Robert Vine in 1903. He died in 1904. But look at this." He handed Poirot another paper. "Her birth certificate. The name recorded is Rose Cunningham." Poirot examined it without surprise. "So, my hypothesis is confirmed. Vanessa Thorne and Rose Cunningham are the same person. But why the deception? Why change her name?" "Because," Poirot said slowly, "she was running from something, or hiding from something, or perhaps both." He opened the diary. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting. The ink faded. Let us see what secrets Vanessa, or rather Rose, chose to record. He read in silence for several minutes. Marsh waited with visible impatience. Finally, Poirot closed the diary and looked up. His face was grave. "What does it say?" Marsh demanded. "It says that on the night of August 28th, 1905, 2 women went to a party at Thorne Rowe's house. One of them died in the memorial fountain. The other disappeared. And the truth of what happened that night has been buried for 30 years beneath roses and silence and a woman's attempt to make peace with an unpayable debt." He held up the diary. "But now, the debt has been called in. And we must determine by whom and why, and whether justice can ever truly be served when the crime is so old and the guilt so tangled." And Marsh reached for the diary. "I will need to read that." "Of course. But I warn you, Inspector, what you will find there is not a simple story of murder and innocence. It is something far more complex and far more tragic." Outside, the sun rose higher. The roses opened their petals to the light, and in a bedroom where a dead woman had kept her secrets, 2 men contemplated the weight of the past and the impossibility of redemption. Chapter 7. The Confession in Ink. The diary was not organized by dates but by thoughts, confessions written in no particular order, as though Rose Cunningham had opened it whenever guilt became unbearable and poured out her soul in whatever words came. Poirot and Inspector Marsh sat in Vanessa's bedroom reading passages aloud to each other, then assembling from fragments a story that had been hidden for 3 decades. March 1920, Marsh read. 15 years since that night. 15 years of waking at 3 in the morning with her face before me. Catherine, my sister in all but blood. I tell myself it was an accident. I tell myself she would forgive me. But the roses know. Every day I tend them, and every day they whisper, murderous, murderous, murderous. Poirot turned pages carefully, his fingers reverent with the weight of what he touched. Here, listen to this. October 1921. Oliver asked me today why I never smile at breakfast. I wanted to tell him, because mornings are when I remember most clearly the dawn light on the fountain, the way her hair floated like dark seaweed, the terrible stillness of her hand trailing in the water. But I said only that I am not a morning person, and he accepted this as truth. How easily we accept lies when they are convenient. They read on, piecing together truth from anguish. The story that emerged was this. In the summer of 1905, Catherine Ashford became secretly engaged to Dr. Marcus Ashford. Not her brother Marcus, but his cousin of the same name, a young physician. She was already promised to Edmund Thorne, a match arranged by families, advantageous and expected. But she had fallen in love with Marcus and carried his child. She had confided everything to Rose Cunningham, her dearest friend, the one person she trusted absolutely. But Rose loved Edmund Thorne with the desperate passion of a woman who knows she cannot have what she desires. She had loved him for years, silently, watching as he courted Catherine, watching as wedding preparations began, dying inside with every arrangement. When Catherine told Rose she intended to break the engagement, to flee to London with Marcus and raise their child away from scandal, Rose had begged her to reconsider. "Think of Edmund," she had pleaded. "Think of the shame. Think of what this will do to all of us." But Catherine was adamant. She would not marry without love. She would not raise her child in a lie. August 1911, Poirot read aloud. "I dream of that night in endless variation. Sometimes I hold my tongue and she lives. Sometimes I speak and she understands. But the truth is always the same. I told her she was selfish. I told her she was destroying Edmund's life for a passing fancy. I told her the child was a mistake that could be corrected. And she looked at me with such horror, such disappointment, as though seeing me truly for the first time." The argument had taken place in the White Garden during the party, away from guests and music and laughter. Words became sharper, crueler. Rose had accused Catherine of betraying everyone who loved her. Catherine had responded that Rose's concern was not for Edmund's happiness, but for her own impossible hope of winning him. "You love him," Catherine had said. "You have always loved him, and you cannot bear that he chose me." It was the truth, and Rose could not deny it. Then Catherine had made her fatal error. She had threatened to tell Edmund everything, to explain that Rose's devotion to him was not mere friendship, but something darker and more desperate. She had called it unwholesome, unnatural, pathetic. January 1918, Marsh read. "I didn't mean to push her. I only meant to silence her. I had to make her stop saying those terrible true things. But my hands were on her shoulders and she pulled away, and her foot caught on the edge of the fountain, and she fell backward. I heard her head strike stone. I heard the splash. I heard nothing after that except my own breathing, loud in the dark." Rose had stood frozen as Catherine's body settled in the water. She had thought surely Catherine would rise, would gasp for air, would be furious but alive. But Catherine did not rise. The water was shallow but sufficient. The blow to her head had stunned her. Within minutes she had drowned. Rose had run, not to get help but simply away, through the gardens, through the wild roses to the road beyond. She had walked through the night to the nearest town, taken the first train, disappeared into London's vast anonymity. Or she had read of Catherine's death in the newspapers. Tragic accident at country house party. Miss Catherine Ashford, beloved daughter, promising young woman, found drowned. No mention of pregnancy, no mention of broken engagement. The family had preserved her reputation even in death. And Rose had understood that she had not merely killed her friend. She had killed the woman Marcus loved. She had killed the mother of an unborn child. She had killed the future Catherine should have had. April 1906, Poirot read. I could not stay away. I know it is madness, but I had to see the place again, had to know what had become of them all. I invented a widow's past, a dead husband, a small inheritance. I called myself Vanessa Vine. I came to Thornrose and I watched Edmund grieve. He was hollow with it. He destroyed not by Catherine's death, but by the loss of what might have been. He did not know she had planned to leave him. No one knew except me and Marcus. And Marcus had disappeared to India, unable to bear England without her. Edmund had noticed the sad, quiet widow who appeared at church, who admired the estate's roses, who seemed to understand grief without needing to speak of it. Within months he had begun calling on her. Within a year he had proposed. She had said yes, knowing it was wrong, knowing she was building her life on Catherine's grave. But she had thought, I can make him happy. I can give him the devotion Catherine would not. I can tend her memory and honour her, and perhaps, somehow, atone. December 1910, Marsh read. Edmund died today. I have been his wife for 4 years, and he never knew, never suspected. I made him happy, I think. I tried. But there were times when he looked at me and I saw Catherine's ghost in his eyes, comparing, finding me lacking. He loved her still. He will always have loved her most. And I will have to carry that knowledge along with all the rest. The final entry was dated just 3 days before Vanessa's death. August 1935. I am so tired. 30 years of penance and still the roses whisper murderous. Helena Cresswell is here and I know what she is. Catherine's daughter, come to find her mother's killer. I see her watching me. I see her knowing. Soon she will confront me. Soon the truth will emerge. And I find I do not care anymore. Let it come. Let justice arrive. I have lived 30 years past the moment I should have confessed, or perhaps drowning in roses is the end I have always deserved. Poirot closed the diary gently. The room was very quiet. Marsh broke the silence. So she knew Helena was Catherine's daughter. She knew she was being investigated. And 3 days later, she drowned in the same manner as her victim. Suicide after all, Poirot murmured, or murder disguised as suicide, disguised as accident. The layers, they complicate everything. You think someone killed her. I think someone knew the truth. Someone read this diary or learned its contents some other way. Someone decided that 30 years was long enough, that justice delayed is still justice, that Rose Cunningham should pay for what she did. Helena. Perhaps she has motive, certainly. But is she capable of such an act? To lure a woman to the distillery, to strike her unconscious, yet to lift her into a vat and watch her drown? He shook his head. I am not yet convinced. Then who? That is what we must discover. Poirot stood. Come, it is time to assemble the household and reveal what we have learned. Truth must be spoken before we can understand how it has been used as a weapon. They gathered in the drawing room, that beautiful space where roses still bloomed in vases as though nothing had changed. Poirot stood before them, the diary in his hands, and told them everything. He told them that Vanessa Thorne was Rose Cunningham, that Catherine Ashford had died not by accident, but by Rose's hand in a moment of passion and error, that Rose had fled and returned and married Edmund Thorne under false pretenses, that she had spent 30 years in penance that could never be sufficient. Marcus Ashford sat as though turned to stone. Helena wept silently. Oliver poured himself whiskey with shaking hands. Iris gripped the arms of her chair and said nothing. When Poirot finished, the silence was absolute. It was Marcus who spoke first, his voice barely a whisper. My cousin, Marcus. She loved him, not me. My cousin. Yes. He left England after Catherine died. He could not bear to remain. And the child. Helena looked up, tears streaming. I was that child. She was going to keep me. She loved me. Yes. Then Rose Cunningham murdered not only my mother, but my entire future. Everything I should have had. She stole it all. The grief in her voice was terrible to hear. And now she is dead, Poirot said quietly. Drowned as Catherine drowned. Justice or revenge, mademoiselle? Which would you call it? Helena met his eyes. I call it too late. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Inspector Marsh cleared his throat. Miss Cresswell, I must ask you directly. Did you kill Vanessa Thorne? Helena smiled without humour. I wanted to, Inspector. God knows I wanted to. But no, I did not. I was going to confront her, yes. I was going to demand the truth. But she died before I could. Someone else achieved what I only dreamed of doing. Then who? Marsh demanded. If not you, then who else knew the truth? Everyone looked at everyone else. And Poirot thought, the murderer is in this room. They have heard themselves discussed. They have listened to the truth revealed. And they have said nothing to defend themselves because they believe, perhaps, that what they did was justice. But murder is not justice. And Hercule Poirot would prove it, or before this day was done. Chapter 8. The Method of Murder. After the revelations in the drawing room, the household dispersed like mourners after a funeral, each retreating to private spaces to absorb what had been learned. Poirot allowed them their solitude. Grief and shock often loosened tongues more effectively than direct questioning. He himself retired to the library with Inspector Marsh to consider what they knew and what remained obscure. The facts are these, Marsh said, consulting his notebook. Vanessa Thorne, formerly Rose Cunningham, was found drowned in a vat of rosewater. Death occurred between 5 and 7 in the evening. She had a contusion on her head consistent with either a fall or a blow. No one admits to seeing her enter the distillery. No signs of struggle, no witnesses. And yet, Poirot observed, someone must have been there. One does not drown oneself in a vat without assistance unless one is very determined indeed. And while Vanessa's diary suggests despair, it does not suggest the active will to suicide. Perhaps she was meeting someone. An assignation. In a rose distillery. Hardly romantic, mon ami. No, if she met someone there, it was for another purpose. A confrontation, perhaps. Or she was lured there on some pretext. By whom? Poirot rose and began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. Let us consider each person in turn. Oliver Thorne has motive, yes. He inherits upon her death. But would he risk murdering her in so theatrical a fashion? A push down the stairs, an accident with a carriage? These would serve his purpose better and attract less scrutiny. Unless he wanted it to look like suicide, to echo Catherine's death. But Oliver knew nothing of Catherine's death beyond the official story. He was 5 years old when it happened. Until we revealed the truth today, he believed it was a simple accident. True. Marsh made a notation. What of the gardener, Fairfax? Ah yes, the mysterious Mr. Fairfax. Poirot paused at the window. A gentleman-turned-servant, devoted to his work, clearly in love with Miss Sutton. What motive would he have? Perhaps he discovered something about Mrs. Thorne, something that threatened his position or his relationship with Miss Sutton. Perhaps. We must learn more about our Mr. Fairfax. Poirot turned back. And then there is Miss Sutton herself. Ill, fragile, seemingly without the strength for murder. Yet I have learned not to dismiss the unlikely suspect merely because they appear weak. What would her motive be? That I do not yet know. But she was terrified when we discovered the body. Not shocked, Inspector. Terrified. There is a difference. Marsh frowned. And Miss Cresswell. She remains the most obvious suspect. Catherine's daughter, seeking revenge for a murder 30 years old. She has lived in this house for 6 years, waiting, watching, planning. Then she learns the truth and acts. But she denies it. Murderers often do. Poirot smiled without humour. Still, I find myself uncertain. Miss Creswell is direct, honest in her emotions. If she had killed Vanessa, I think she would admit it. She would consider it justice, not crime. Then we are nowhere. On the contrary, we are merely at the beginning. Poirot moved toward the door. Come, let us examine the scene once more. Now, sometimes the place itself tells more truth than any witness. They walked through the gardens in afternoon light, the roses bright and indifferent to human tragedy. The distillery stood silent, its door closed now, a constable posted outside to preserve the scene. Inside, the vats remained as they had been, though Vanessa's body was gone. The floor had been mopped clean of spilled water. But Poirot ignored these obvious features and instead examined the margins, the overlooked details. He found what he sought beneath a workbench near the door. A teacup, delicate porcelain, hand-painted with roses. He lifted it carefully by the rim. Inspector, observe, there is perhaps a quarter-inch of cold tea remaining in the bottom. Marsh peered at it. So Mrs. Thorne had tea before she died. What of it? Poirot sniffed delicately at the rim. This tea has an additional scent beneath the rose perfume that permeates everything here. Something bitter, something medicinal, laudanum. Perhaps we must have it analysed. But if I am correct, it suggests premeditation. Someone prepared tea, added a sedative, gave it to Vanessa here in the distillery. She drank it, became drowsy, perhaps unconscious. Then she was placed in the vat to drown. Marsh's face darkened. That would be cold-blooded murder, not a crime of passion. Yes. And it would require someone Vanessa trusted enough to accept tea from. Someone she would meet here without suspicion. He continued his examination, finding a wooden ladder positioned near the largest vat. Scratches in the floor suggested it had been dragged recently from its usual position against the wall. Near the vat's base, barely visible in the dim light, were several drops of what might have been wax. Candle wax, Poirot murmured. Someone worked here by candlelight. Why? When there are oil lamps available? Perhaps the lamps were out of fuel, or perhaps someone wished to work in near darkness, to hide what they were doing even from themselves. He climbed the ladder and looked into the vat that had held Vanessa's body. The water was cloudy still with rose essence, but at the bottom, something glinted. He gestured to Marsh. Your constable has a long pole, yes? We must retrieve that object. It took several minutes of awkward fishing, but eventually they pulled free a small silver locket on a broken chain. Poirot opened it with gentle fingers. Inside were 2 miniature photographs. One showed Catherine Ashford, dark and vivid. The other showed a younger Helena Cresswell, perhaps 20 years old. This belonged to Miss Cresswell, Marsh said. She must have dropped it during the murder, or it was torn from her neck during a struggle we have no other evidence of. Poirot closed the locket thoughtfully. Or it was placed here deliberately to incriminate her. You think she is being framed. I think we must not jump to conclusions. He pocketed the locket. Come, I wish to speak with Mr. Fairfax. They found the gardener in the white garden, dead-heading roses with mechanical precision. His hands moved without conscious thought, clip and discard, while his eyes stared at nothing. Mr. Fairfax, Poirot said gently, may we speak with you? The man started, dropping his shears. He bent to retrieve them, and Poirot noticed his hands were shaking. Of course, sir. Though I cannot imagine what help I can be. You can begin by telling us the truth about who you are. Fairfax went very still. I am the head gardener. You are a gentleman playing at being a gardener. Your hands may be calloused now, but your accent is educated. Your bearing is that of someone accustomed to command, and your knowledge of roses is that of an enthusiast, not a professional. So I ask again, who are you? A long silence. Then, with what seemed like relief, Fairfax spoke. My name is James Fairfax Ashford. I am the son of Marcus Ashford's cousin, the cousin who loved Catherine. Poirot nodded slowly. And you came here for what purpose? To understand. My father died in India 20 years ago, heartbroken and alone. He left letters, journals, all speaking of Catherine and his lost love and the child he never knew. I wanted to see the place where she died, to understand what happened. I never meant to stay. But then I met Iris. His voice softened on her name. You are lovers, Poirot stated. Yes, and she is dying, Mr. Poirot. Tuberculosis, 2 years at most. But she is pregnant with my child. We want to marry, to leave this place, to give her some happiness before the end. But we have no money. I cannot take her away. Did Mrs. Thorne know of your true identity? No, I am certain she did not. She knew me only as a gardener she hired 5 years ago. And where were you between 5 and 7 o'clock on the evening she died? With Iris, in the wild garden. We meet there most evenings. He met Poirot's eyes directly. We were together the entire time. She can confirm it. Poirot studied him. Young man, you do realize that providing each other alibis makes you both suspects, rather than clearing either of you. I know only that I did not kill her, and Iris is incapable of such an act. She can barely walk to the end of the garden without exhausting herself. She could not have lifted Mrs. Thorne into that vat, unless you did the lifting for her. Why would we? We had no quarrel with her. We only wanted to be left alone. Poirot turned to Marsh. Inspector, please verify Miss Sutton's condition with a physician. I wish to know precisely what she is capable of physically. Already done, Marsh said. I sent for her doctor this morning. He confirms advanced tuberculosis and general weakness. He says she should not be walking unassisted, let alone committing murder. Yet she walks every morning to meet her lover, Poirot observed. One should never underestimate what desperation can make possible. He thanked Fairfax, and they left him to his roses. As they walked back toward the house, Marsh said, So we have Helena with motive and opportunity, but no proof. Oliver with financial motive, but no apparent knowledge to link past and present. Fairfax and Iris with secrets, but seemingly no reason to kill. And Marcus Ashford, who has not been on our list at all. Poirot stopped walking. Say that again. Marcus Ashford. You have not seriously considered him. Number. Because he is my friend, and one does not wish to suspect one's friends. But let us consider him now. His sister died here 30 years ago. He has spent 3 decades grieving, wondering, suspecting something was wrong. And then he returns to Thornrose and brings with him Hercule Poirot to observe the household. Why? What did he hope to discover? Perhaps he simply wanted your perspective on obsession, as he said. Or perhaps he wanted a witness, someone to observe and remember and testify if needed. He paused. Inspector, I must see Marcus immediately. They found him in his room, lying on his bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Marcus, Poirot said, we must speak frankly. His friend looked at him with eyes that were red from weeping. About what, Poirot? About the fact that the woman I have known for 15 years was the girl my cousin loved? That she killed my sister through carelessness and passion? That she married Edmund and lived a lie for 30 years while I mourned in ignorance? About whether you knew any of this before today. Marcus sat up slowly. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting nothing. I am asking. The room was very quiet. Then Marcus said, I suspected. Not the details, but something. Vanessa was so devoted to Catherine's memory, too devoted for someone who had merely been Edmund's wife. And there were moments when she looked at me with such guilt, such fear, as though I might suddenly see through her disguise. I began to wonder, and when I found a reference to Rose Cunningham in old letters, and realized she had disappeared the same night Catherine died, I began to form theories. And you said nothing. What could I say? I had no proof, only suspicions. So I invited you here, hoping your eyes would see what mine had missed. And did they? Marcus looked at him steadily. More than I bargained for. But I did not kill her, Poirot. Even knowing what I know now, I did not kill her. Whatever she did, she paid for it in 30 years of penance. That is punishment enough. Poirot believed him. But belief was not proof, and proof was what he needed. They left Marcus to his grief and returned to the library. So, Marsh said, where does that leave us? It leaves us, Poirot said quietly, with one more interview to conduct. The most important one. He checked his pocket watch. It is nearly time for tea. Let us see who serves it, and how. And then, perhaps, the truth would finally emerge from the shadows. Chapter 9. The Denouement. Poirot requested that the entire household assemble in the drawing room at 6 o'clock. It was not a request that could be refused, though Oliver protested that he had urgent business in the village, and Iris pleaded exhaustion. They came nonetheless. They sat in their accustomed places as though this were merely another evening at Thornrose, as though a woman had not died, as though secrets had not been laid bare like roots torn from earth. Inspector Marsh stood by the door, watchful and official. 2 constables waited in the hall beyond. The atmosphere was thick with tension and unspoken dread. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his egg-shaped head tilted slightly as he regarded each person in turn. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. Mesdames and messieurs, we have reached the conclusion of this sad affair. It is time to speak of truth and justice, and of the terrible line between them. He paused, allowing the words to settle. 3 days ago, Vanessa Thorne was found dead in the Rose Distillery, drowned in a vat of rosewater. The manner of her death echoed precisely the death of Catherine Ashford 30 years before. This symmetry, it was not accidental. It was deliberate. It was intended as justice. Helena Cresswell sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her face expressionless. We have learned much in these past days, Poirot continued. We have learned that Vanessa Thorne was in truth Rose Cunningham, Catherine Ashford's dearest friend. We have learned that Catherine died not by accident, but through Rose's action, a push in anger that resulted in tragedy. We have learned that Rose fled, reinvented herself, and returned to marry Edmund Thorne out of guilt and love and the desperate need to atone. He began to pace, his small feet moving with precision across the carpet. But someone in this house learned these truths before I did. Someone who had reason to seek vengeance. Someone who believed that 30 years of penance was insufficient payment for murder. All eyes turned to Helena. She met them calmly. It was not murder, she said clearly. "The diary makes that plain. It was an accident, a terrible accident." "Ah, but you did not know that when you killed her, did you, mademoiselle?" Poirot's voice was gentle, almost sympathetic. "You believed it was murder. You had spent 6 years researching, investigating, piecing together your mother's story. You knew Rose Cunningham disappeared the night Catherine died. You suspected Rose had killed Catherine and fled. And when you came to Thorn Rose and met Vanessa Thorne, something about her made you wonder. A gesture, perhaps, a way of moving, a habit of speech. You began to suspect they were the same woman." Helena said nothing. "You have your mother's letters, yes. Letters Rose wrote to Catherine. You know the handwriting. And one day, perhaps, you saw a note written by Vanessa Thorne, and you recognized it. Or perhaps you found an old photograph and saw the resemblance. However it happened, you became convinced, and you decided that justice must be done." The room was absolutely silent. On the evening of her death, Vanessa received a message. Someone asked her to meet at the distillery at 5 o'clock, a matter of urgency regarding the rose oil. She went, suspecting nothing, because the summons came from someone she had no reason to distrust. Poirot withdrew the teacup from his pocket, now wrapped in cloth. "You prepared tea, Miss Cresswell. Tea with laudanum added, enough to make her drowsy and compliant, but not immediately unconscious. You met her at the distillery. You spoke of roses, of the exhibition you were planning, of how you needed her advice on something, and you offered her tea." He set the cup on the table before her. She drank it. Why would she not? You had been a guest in her home for 6 years. She trusted you. And as the drug took effect, you told her the truth. You told her you knew who she really was. You told her you knew she had murdered Catherine Ashford. And you told her that you were Catherine's daughter, come to exact justice. Helena's face had gone white, but she remained silent. "What did she say, mademoiselle? Did she try to explain? Did she tell you it was an accident, a moment of anger and terrible consequence? Or was she too drowsy by then to speak clearly?" Helena's hands clenched in her lap. She said, her voice barely audible, she said she was sorry, that she had spent 30 years being sorry, that she welcomed death because she could not live with the guilt any longer. And you helped her achieve that death? Yes. The word was simple, final, absolute. Poirot nodded slowly. You struck her on the head, not hard enough to kill, but enough to daze her further. Then you used the ladder. You are strong, mademoiselle, from years of physical work. You lifted her, unconscious or nearly so, and placed her in the vat. You watched as the water covered her face. You waited until you were certain she was dead, and then you cleaned everything with great care, removing all evidence of your presence. "Almost all evidence," Marsh interjected. "You lost your locket in the process. We found it in the vat." Helena touched her throat where the chain should have been. She must have grabbed it as she fell. "I did not realize it was gone until later. I thought about going back, but the gardener was there, and then everyone came." "Why the vat?" Oliver demanded suddenly. "Why not simply push her into the fountain as she pushed Catherine?" "Because the fountain death was an accident," Poirot explained. "This was to be justice, deliberate, inescapable, symbolic, drowning in roses as Catherine drowned, the perfume suffocating her as lies had suffocated the truth for 30 years. It was, in Miss Cresswell's mind, appropriate punishment." Helena looked at him directly for the first time. "You understand then. I understand the impulse. I do not condone the action." Poirot's voice was firm. "You believed you were serving justice, mademoiselle, but you were wrong on 2 counts. First, Catherine's death was not murder, but manslaughter, an accidental killing born of passion and error. Rose Cunningham was guilty of leaving the scene, of failing to save her friend, of living under false pretenses. But she was not a murderer in the eyes of the law. And second, justice is not yours to dispense. You appointed yourself judge, jury, and executioner. You took a life to avenge a life. You became the very thing you sought to punish." Helena's composure finally cracked. She buried her face in her hands. "I could not let her live unpunished," she whispered. "My mother died young, alone, giving birth to me in secret and giving me away because she had no choice. She never got to live her life. She never got to raise her child. And the woman who killed her lived on. Married the man my mother should have married, tended gardens and grew old in comfort, while my mother rotted in a grave." Her voice rose, breaking. "How is that justice? How is that fair?" "It is not fair," Poirot said quietly. "Life is not fair, mademoiselle. Your mother's death was a tragedy compounded by cowardice. Rose Cunningham's choice to flee rather than face consequences was morally wrong, but she did face consequences. Every day for 30 years. The guilt, the fear, the endless penance. She lived in a prison of her own making. That is not enough, perhaps not. But it was not for you to decide what was enough." He moved closer, his voice gentle but inexorable. "Tell me, mademoiselle, now that you have killed her, do you feel justice has been served? Does your mother's memory rest easier? Do you yourself feel peace?" Helena looked up, and tears streaming down her face. "No, I feel nothing but emptiness. I thought I would feel righteous. I thought I would feel that I had honored my mother. But all I feel is that I have become something terrible. That I have done something I can never undo. Yes, that is the truth of revenge. It does not restore what was lost. It only adds more loss to the account." Inspector Marsh stepped forward. "Miss Helena Cresswell, I am arresting you for the murder of Vanessa Thorne. You need not say anything, but anything you do say may be used in evidence against you." Helena rose with dignity. She looked around the room at the assembled faces. Oliver was pale with shock. Iris wept silently. Marcus stared at nothing. James Fairfax stood at attention like a soldier. "I am sorry," Helena said, "to all of you. I came here seeking truth and I found it. But truth did not bring the satisfaction I imagined. It brought only more tragedy." She turned to Marcus. "Your sister was radiant. I have her photographs, her letters, her paintings. She loved roses, she loved life. She was going to name me Rose, after her friend. She died wanting to live. I hope that gives you some peace." Marcus could not speak. He could only nod. The constables led Helena away. She did not resist. She looked almost relieved, as though the weight she had carried for 6 years had finally been lifted by confession. When she was gone, the remaining occupants of the room sat in stunned silence. It was Oliver who spoke first, his voice hoarse. All this time we lived with a murderess and a ghost, and we never knew." "We all have ghosts," Poirot said quietly. "Some we create, some create us. And the tragedy of Thornrose is that no one was innocent. Not Catherine, who planned to break her engagement and cause scandal. Not Rose, who let passion drive her to violence. Not Helena, who chose revenge over mercy. And not any of us who stood by and allowed the past to poison the present. "What happens now?" Iris asked. "What becomes of Thornrose?" "That is for you to decide, mademoiselle. The house, the gardens, the roses, they will continue. They always do. It is only people who end." Marcus stood abruptly. "I must leave. I cannot remain in this place another moment." "Nor I," said Oliver. One by one they departed until only Poirot remained in the drawing room where roses still bloomed in vases, beautiful and indifferent, releasing their scent into air thick with tragedy and revelation. He stood at the window looking out at the gardens as darkness fell. The white garden became invisible. The blood garden disappeared. The wild roses merged with the night. But the scent remained sweet and suffocating, drowning everything in perfume that could not disguise the smell of death beneath. Justice had been served after a fashion. The guilty would be punished. The truth had been revealed. But Hercule Poirot felt no satisfaction, no triumph. He felt only the weight of waste. 2 women dead across 30 years. A 3rd woman destroyed by her own need for vengeance. Countless lives damaged by secrets and lies, and the refusal to forgive. He touched the window glass, cold beneath his fingers. In the morning, he would return to London. He would leave Thornrose to its roses and its ghosts. He would return to his ordered life, his perfect symmetry, his controlled world where justice was clean and guilt was absolute. But he would carry with him the memory of this place, this house where beauty concealed tragedy, where devotion became obsession, where love twisted into something darker and more dangerous. And he would remember that sometimes, even when the mystery is solved and the murderer revealed, there are no winners, only survivors, and roses that continue to bloom, indifferent to the dead buried beneath them. Chapter 10. After the Storm. The trial of Helena Cresswell opened in October at the Somerset Assizes and became the sensation of the season. The newspapers seized upon every detail with ghoulish enthusiasm. The illegitimate daughter, the 30-year-old tragedy, the woman who drowned in roses, the artist turned murderer. It had all the elements of Gothic melodrama, and the public consumed it with voracious appetite. Poirot attended the proceedings, but did not testify. He had given his statement to the police, had provided the evidence he had gathered, had ensured that truth was available to those who sought it. But he could not bring himself to stand in the witness box and condemn Helena Cresswell with his words. He could only observe and feel the weight of what had transpired. The prosecution argued for murder. Premeditated, cold-blooded, calculated. Helena had drugged her victim, struck her unconscious, drowned her deliberately. She had shown no mercy, no hesitation, no remorse until caught. The defense painted a different picture. A woman driven by grief and false belief, who had thought she was avenging a brutal murder, only to discover she had killed someone guilty of manslaughter at most. A woman who had been damaged by adoption, by never knowing her mother, by spending her life piecing together fragments of a lost history. A woman who had acted not from malice, but from a twisted sense of justice. The jury listened to it all with grave attention. They heard Dr. Marcus Ashford testify about his sister's death, his voice breaking as he spoke of finding her body in the fountain 30 years ago. They heard Oliver Thorne describe Vanessa's obsessive devotion to the gardens, her daily rituals of penance. They heard James Fairfax reveal his true identity and speak of his father's lifelong grief for the woman he loved and lost. And they heard Helena herself take the stand and tell her story with quiet dignity. "I believed I was serving justice," she said. "I believed my mother had been murdered by her best friend out of jealousy and desire for the man my mother was engaged to marry. I believed Rose Cunningham had killed Catherine Ashford deliberately and then fled, only to return years later and marry the man my mother should have wed. I believed she had lived a comfortable life built on my mother's grave, while I grew up without knowing who I was or where I came from." The courtroom was absolutely silent. I was wrong about the murder, I know that now. It was an accident, a terrible accident born of anger and passion. But I was not wrong about the consequences. My mother died. I was given away. My father grieved himself to death in a foreign land. All of these things happened because Rose Cunningham pushed Catherine Ashford and then chose to flee rather than face what she had done. She ran, and she let my mother drown while she saved herself. Helena's voice remained steady, but her hands gripped the railing before her. "I do not expect forgiveness. I do not expect mercy. I took a life. I did so deliberately and with planning. But I ask the court to understand that I did not act from evil, but from love. Love for a mother I never knew. Love for the life we should have had together. Love twisted into something dark and terrible, yes, but love nonetheless." When she finished, there was not a dry eye in the courtroom save for Poirot's. He watched with the detachment of one who has seen too much of human nature to be surprised by its capacity for both good and evil, often intertwined. Yet the judge's summation was careful and considered. He acknowledged the complexity of the case, the moral ambiguity, the question of whether this was murder or vigilante justice, evil or misguided righteousness. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, their verdict was manslaughter, not murder. The judge sentenced Helena to 12 years' imprisonment. It was not perfect justice, but it was the compromise the law makes when truth is too tangled for clean resolution, when guilt is distributed among the living and the dead, when the only clear thing is that everyone has lost. Poirot left the courthouse and did not return. 3 weeks after the trial, Oliver Thorne sent word to Poirot that he was selling Thorne Rose House. He could not bear to remain there, could not bear the roses. He could not bear the weight of ghosts and secrets and 15 years of wasted hatred directed at a woman who had been as much a victim as anyone else. "I have paid my debts," Oliver wrote. "I am moving to London to begin again. I will never be happy, I think. But I will try to be honest. That is something." Iris Sutton and James Fairfax married quietly in a small church in Cornwall. Poirot received an invitation but could not attend. He sent a gift instead, a silver tea service engraved with their initials, and wished them whatever happiness could be found in the time they had remaining. They took a cottage by the sea, as Iris had dreamed. The salt air was kinder to her lungs than rose perfume had been. She had her baby in the spring, a daughter with James's dark hair and her own serious expression. Iris lived for 18 months after the wedding. They were, by all accounts, the happiest months of her life. She died on a morning when the tide was coming in, the sound of waves filling the cottage, the smell of salt and seaweed, replacing the suffocating scent of roses. She had finally breathed something other than beauty. She had finally lived. James raised their daughter alone, teaching her about plants and honesty and the difference between duty and love. He never returned to Thorne Rose. He never spoke of that time except to say that he had learned the high cost of secrets and the higher cost of revenge. Dr. Marcus Ashford returned to London but found he could not resume his work. He had spent 30 years building a career on understanding the human mind, and now he understood that he had understood nothing. How could he counsel others when he had not seen the truth that lived in his own past? He retired early and moved to a small flat near the Thames. He spent his days walking and thinking and grieving for the sister he had lost twice, once to death and once to the revelation of how she died. But slowly, painfully, he began to write. Not psychology, not theory, but a memoir of Catherine. He wrote about her radiance, her fear, her secret pregnancy, her desperate desire for a different life. He wrote about Rose Cunningham's devotion and Vanessa Thorne's atonement, and Helena Cresswell's misguided justice. He wrote to give all of them the memorial they deserved. The book was never published, but writing it gave Marcus something approaching peace. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but the ability to live with knowledge rather than being destroyed by it. The rose gardens at Thornrose were left to grow wild. The new owners, a businessman and his practical wife, tried briefly to maintain them but found the task overwhelming. Roses without devotion become thorns and chaos. Within a year, the careful divisions had blurred. Within 2 years, the gardens were overgrown and impassable. Within 3 years, they were beautiful and brutal in equal measure, a testament to what happens when order is abandoned and nature reclaims what was always hers. The copper vats in the distillery rusted and filled with rainwater. The stone building stood empty, its door locked, its windows dark. Sometimes people claimed they could still smell roses in the air, thick and suffocating, like drowning. But that might have been only memory. Poirot left Thornrose on a cool morning in early September, the morning after Helena's arrest. The light was amber again, the way it had been when he arrived. But everything else had changed. He paused at the door of the house, already feeling empty and haunted, and looked back at the gardens. The white garden where 2 women had stood in silence. The blood garden with its dark blooms. The memorial fountain filled with wilting flowers. The distillery where a woman had drowned in beauty and perfume and penance. He thought, justice is supposed to feel like resolution, but this feels like dissolution. Everyone guilty, everyone punished, everyone suffering. And the only person who tried to atone is the one who paid most. He returned to London to his apartment with its perfect symmetry, its gleaming surfaces, its order. He arranged his toiletries with precision. He made his breakfast with meticulous care. But there was a moment as he poured his coffee when his hand hovered over the cup, and he was still. He was thinking about roses and drowning, about women who changed their names and women who could never change what they had done, about daughters searching for mothers and mothers who died before their daughters could know them, about justice and mercy and the terrible space between them. He was thinking about the fact that he had solved the mystery, but saved no one. That truth, when exposed, had only multiplied the suffering. That perhaps some secrets should stay buried in rose gardens, beautiful and deadly, untouched. He would never know if he had done the right thing. That uncertainty would stay with him. But he had solved the case. He had uncovered the truth. He had served justice. Whether that was enough, he could not say. That evening, as the sun set over London, Hercule Poirot sat in his favourite chair and allowed himself to remember, not the facts of the case which were filed away in his orderly mind, but the feeling of that place, the weight of its beauty, the suffocation of its perfume, the way roses could bloom so thick they drowned out everything else. He thought of Vanessa Thorne, who was really Rose Cunningham, kneeling every morning at the fountain where her friend had died, replacing roses with roses, performing a ritual of remembrance that was also a ritual of guilt. He thought of Helena Cresswell, who had sought her mother's memory and found only more tragedy, who had pursued justice and achieved only revenge, who would spend 12 years in prison learning what Vanessa had spent 30 years learning, that some debts cannot be paid, some losses cannot be restored, some wounds cannot heal. He thought of Catherine Ashford, dead at 23, who never knew her daughter, never lived her true life, never had the chance to choose differently, the one true innocent in the entire affair, and the one who paid the highest price. Outside his window, London continued its evening rhythms. Carriages passed, voices called. Somewhere a church bell marked the hour. Life went on, indifferent to tragedy, indifferent to justice, indifferent to the small stories of individual sorrow. And in Somerset, in a house that stood empty, in gardens that grew wild, roses continued to bloom. Beautiful, thorned, suffocating, blooming over graves no one remembered, you drowning in their own perfume, surviving long after the people who planted them had turned to dust. If you stood in the rose garden at Thornrose now, in the fading light of autumn, you might catch the scent of something that was not quite roses. Something sadder, something older, something that smelled like water and stone and blood beneath petals. The scent of a woman who drowned in roses, and the women who drowned with her. Hercule Poirot closed his eyes and allowed himself for just a moment to grieve. Not for justice served or mysteries solved, but for the waste of it all, the beautiful, terrible, unavoidable waste. Then he opened his eyes, straightened his jacket, and prepared for the evening. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new mysteries, new opportunities to impose order upon chaos. But tonight he would remember Thornrose, and he would know that some mysteries, even when solved completely, leave questions that have no answers. That was the hardest truth of all, and perhaps the most important one to remember.